What's up guys? Before we get into today's review, I wanted to quickly tell you all that I've launched a new YouTube channel. It's called WTP Productions and it's all about Pokemon. Pokemon is probably the one thing I love more than animated shows from the late 90s and 2000s, so I'm pretty excited to start turning that passion into awesome videos. There's going to be reviews of the Pokemon games in the same style as my reviews on this channel, in-depth videos about Pokemon history, mysteries and unsolved questions, and even a podcast dedicated to reviewing every episode of the Pokemon anime. If any of this sounds interesting to you, I'd love if you checked out the channel and subscribed if you like what you see. I've taken up enough of your time though, so let's get stuck into what you're really here for. My name's Brandon and this is Cartoon Network Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on all of the video games based on Cartoon Network franchises and retrospectively review them. After a bit of time off spent in Japan visiting damn near every Pokemon Center in the country, I'm back and jumping straight into the fire. This week I'm covering a curious game, The Secret Saturdays Beasts of the Fifth Sun. Why is this game curious? Well, it's the first time I'm covering a game based on a show that I really know absolutely nothing about. The Secret Saturdays wasn't exactly around for very long, it lasted just 2 seasons, and I don't think it ever took off in Australia because I can barely ever remember it airing. However, it's clear that Cartoon Network thought that this was the next big thing. The Secret Saturdays premiered on October 8, 2008, and just 1 year later on October 20, Beasts of the Fifth Sun hit the Wii, PS2, PSP, and Nintendo DS. Not only was this released a year after the show had premiered, but it was also 1 year from the release of Ben 10 Alien Force. Off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure this is the longest gap between Cartoon Network game releases we've seen so far in this series. Looking at Cartoon Network's video game releases, you can see why they were so eager for the Secret Saturdays to become huge. At this point in time, Ben 10 was their only major hit. After Beasts of the Fifth Sun, it wouldn't be until the release of a Johnny Test game in 2011 that we would see a non-Ben 10 show getting the video game treatment. Unfortunately for Cartoon Network, this new show didn't take off. The show would ultimately stick around for just 2 seasons, with the second consisting of only 10 episodes. It's honestly a contest between this and Generator X for the most obscure Cartoon Network show to receive a video game. Those with a keen eye will notice a lot of similarities between this game and the Ben 10 games. First off, the DS port was developed by First Playable Productions, the team who have been in charge of the Ben 10 DS games. On consoles, development was handled by High Voltage Software. Avid watchers of this channel will know I'm a big fan of High Voltage. They've developed the best Cartoon Network games, and they were also the developers for Ben 10 Protector of Earth. Finally, D3, who publish all the Ben 10 games, are the publisher here. So it's clear we have competent people with a good track record in charge. Critically, the game nabbed a 60 on Metacritic. When it comes to Cartoon Network games, a 60 is like gold, so there's a whole lot of positives going in favour of this game. I'm going in blind to this game and the series as a whole, but to me, it seems like there's a lot to be optimistic about. You know how I said this series has a lot in common with Ben 10? It's clear Cartoon Network were trying to replicate its success with the show, and the game had all of the same people working on it who worked on Protector of Earth. So it would come as no surprise that the games would be at least a little bit similar. However, I was floored to find out this game is basically identical. Firstly, all your controls are exactly the same. Square is your light attack, circle is your heavy attack, and L1 is your block. In Beasts of the Fifth Sun, you play predominantly as Zack. He's a kid who has no special physical powers, however what he does have is a grappling hook. Zack plays almost identically as when you play as Ben in the Ben 10 games. You'd probably think it's impossible for this game to copy Ben 10's alien abilities. Well, they managed to slide that concept in too. You see, Zack has the ability to sort of scan monsters that are called cryptids. A lot of the time scanning the cryptids simply helps remove an obstacle in your way. When it comes to the slightly rare combat sections, Zack can take control of cryptids and use them to fight. While the aliens have controlled brilliantly so far in the 2 Ben 10 games, here they are clunky, boring, and mostly feel like a half-baked idea. In fact, combat is by far the worst thing in this game. For the most part, this game is actually a puzzle platformer, but to change things up you'll regularly encounter small enemy areas like you would in the Ben 10 games. I'll go in depth on the puzzle platformer gameplay in a moment, but it's quite clear that they put a whole lot of effort into that side and then shoehorned combat in. Fighting enemies is just so goddamn dull. There are no combos, no crazy special moves, nothing of note whatsoever. Occasionally you'll be able to use other members of the family in combat. They're supposed to be stronger and better suited to fighting, but I found in most cases that Zack actually controlled way better and much more fluidly than them. You're literally just mashing square or circle repeatedly while the game grinds to a halt. I imagine that this is what the Ben 10 games would look like if their combat was god-awful. It blows my mind that the same people who developed the framework for basically every Ben 10 game in history also made this. It really does seem like they spent all their time on the platforming mechanics only to have a higher up tell them that kids wouldn't want to play a game where you don't beat stuff up. The biggest hook of the game is the ability for Zack to grapple, which I mentioned earlier. The grappling hook makes for so many unique ways to travel through a level. Zipping and swinging about a level is so much fun, and most of the time it works flawlessly. There are the occasional janky moments that might result in a death, but more often than not it was so much fun that I didn't care. The grappling hook is this game's greatest strength by far, and I honestly believe it was good enough to carry the game on its own. You really didn't need any combat whatsoever, outside of the occasional smack to a basic enemy. The monsters also end up playing a part in the traversal. Sometimes you'll be using them to solve puzzles, while other times you'll be riding on them. These were hit and miss. The vast majority of them are great in theory. Most of them make you actually think, but they often went on for way too long and put too many of them in a row. Eventually it just becomes tedious, and I'd be begging to have them let me get back to swinging. There's also Fiskitten, who is part of the family, I guess. Not really sure what his deal is, but he can climb walls and gets used in levels every now and then. Something I really disliked was that you're introduced to new monsters for every single level. Essentially, every level has a new gimmick, and I do understand why they chose to give you a new set of monsters every level. This is one time I would have loved if they just copied Ben 10 though. Once you utilise a monster in a level, you never see them again. I think it would have been really cool to build up this arsenal and then have them combine powers in the later levels, or have different puzzle styles cross over with one another. Instead, they're all disposed of almost immediately, and as a result become pretty forgettable. As far as the story goes for Beasts of the Fifth Sun, I was pretty let down. Look, I wasn't expecting some Oscar-worthy narrative, but some level of flow to the story would have been nice. The transition between levels is ridiculously jarring. I often began a new level wondering what the hell was going on. Every level kicks off with a cutscene, but so many times it felt unrelated to the events of the last level. It's almost like you're watching a movie that has every second scene removed. The story is about some dude stealing 8 monsters so he can blow up the sun. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but then again, nobody was ever playing this for the rich narrative. What I do like about the narrative is the globe-trotting adventure. This is something Protector of Earth did, and it made for a lot of very cool settings. Beast of the Fifth Sun has the exact same thing going here. The biggest standout is the Egypt level, where you're running around the pyramids and the Sphinx. The Egypt setting combined with Zack's grappling hook were giving me serious Nathan Drake vibes here. Speaking of Zack, good lord does he fucking suck. I'm glad this game was short, because I couldn't stand another second listening to this cringeworthy loser.
A buku about you! But whatever you call it, it's kinda making me hungry.
He only ever opens his mouth to make the dullest of puns or lame jokes.
So seriously, how do you even go to the bathroom in this?
None of this is ever remotely funny or even slightly endearing in a dorky way. When he does open his mouth to try and give some sort of relevant information to the player, he somehow still manages to be annoying. Whenever he encounters a cryptid, he reacts with pure excitement. This is fine out of context, but when you consider some cryptids are friends and some are foes, this is an issue. Zack's "wow, a cryptid" response doesn't help you discern whether it'll try and kill you or not, so you basically just have to expect you're about to get into a fight. The wider cast of characters is all exceptionally dull too. The parents are bland and only show rare hints of personality, and even the wacky uncle character is ridiculously subdued. I think the only character I slightly liked was the main antagonist, purely because he's great in the opening cutscene. Visually, this game's a stinker. This came out in 2009, just under 2 years after Protector of Earth, yet somehow looks worse. The cutscenes are of disappointing quality, and the in-game visuals are a noticeable step down. I should also mention that I wasn't able to complete the game. With about 10 minutes before the very end, I came to a puzzle I couldn't get past as a specific monster I needed wouldn't spawn. I played through this entire level again to see if it would work, and it didn't. I'm not sure whether this was an emulation issue or something actually wrong with the game, so I'm not going to knock at any points for it, especially considering I had basically finished the game by then.
This fall, get ready to swing into action. Cartoon Network's smash hit is coming to your favorite video game system. The Secret Saturday's Beasts of the Fifth Sun, the video game. The evil VV Argos and his goons are up to no good, and it's up to you to save the day. Travel the world with Zack and the rest of the Saturday's family and explore 10 amazing action-packed levels.
The Secret Saturday's Beasts of the Fifth Sun is essentially the mirror image of the Ben 10 games. The Ben 10 games have great combat and poor platforming, while this game has extremely enjoyable platforming but dreadfully dull combat. High Voltage Software desperately tried to replicate what worked for Protector of Earth, but unfortunately they missed the mark here. To be fair to them, I think the Secret Saturdays is just an inherently worse property than Ben 10. Clearly Cartoon Network were trying to force it to be a big thing, but the strength of the franchise just wasn't there. High Voltage Software would go on to develop a bunch more Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and Disney games after this, so I have no doubt they'll bounce back, and I'm still looking forward to playing those games.